They found a house beneath a Byzantine church that had been protected for 1,700 years. And inside, carved into the plastered walls, was a name, Peter, in 1968. Archaeologists working in Capernaum broke through the floor of an ancient, octagonal church and discovered something impossible. A first-century house, perfectly preserved, with walls covered in Christian graffiti written in Greek, Aramaic, and Syriac, prayers, symbols, crosses, and inscriptions that said one thing over and over: Peter is here. This wasn't just any house. This was the home mentioned in the Gospels, the place where Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law, where he taught crowds gathered at the door, where the paralytic was lowered through the roof. And the evidence doesn't rely on faith or tradition. It's written in stone, carved into plaster, documented by decades of excavation. This is the story of how archaeologists proved that the House of Peter, one of the most important locations in early Christianity, actually existed. And what they found changes everything we thought we knew about the first followers of Jesus. Capernaum sits on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. 2,000 years ago, it was a fishing village, small, modest, built from black basalt stone. The houses were simple, single-story structures with rough walls and roofs made of tree branches, earth, and straw. The kind of roof you could dig through if you needed to. Streets were unpaved, narrow. The entire village stretched along the lakeshore in a thin strip, home to maybe 1,500 people. Most were fishermen. Some farmed. A few ran small businesses processing fish for trade. It wasn't wealthy. It wasn't important. It was just another Galilean village where people worked hard, paid their taxes, and tried to survive. But Capernaum had something other villages didn't: location. It sat right on the border between two territories. To the east, across the Jordan River, was Bethsaida, controlled by Herod Philip. To the west was Capernaum, controlled by Herod Antipas. And that border mattered, because taxes were different on each side. And if you were a fisherman who needed your catch processed and sold, you wanted to be in the territory with the lowest taxes and the closest fish processing plant. That plant was in Magdala, in Antipas's territory. Same as Capernaum, which is why two brothers, Simon Peter and Andrew, moved from Bethsaida to Capernaum. They weren't just fishermen, they were businessmen. And Capernaum gave them a tax advantage. Peter and Andrew shared a house. 2 families, 2 courtyards. Black basalt walls, dirt floors. Nothing special, just a typical Galilean home. And then Jesus showed up. The Gospels say Jesus made Capernaum his base of operations. He left Nazareth and moved to this fishing village. And he stayed in Peter's house. He taught there, healed there, gathered his disciples there. The house became more than a home. It became a meeting place, a center for Jesus' ministry in Galilee. And after Jesus died, something extraordinary happened. The house didn't go back to being a normal residence. It transformed. And that transformation is what archaeologists discovered 1,900 years later. The modern story begins in 1905. That's when archaeological work first started at Capernaum. Early excavators uncovered the ruins of a massive white limestone synagogue. Beautiful, elaborate, with carved columns and decorative stonework. For decades, scholars believed this was the synagogue where Jesus taught, the same one mentioned in the Gospels. But in 1968, Franciscan archaeologists Virgilio Corbo and Stanislao Lofreda did something no one had done before. They dug beneath the synagogue floor, and they found coins, thousands of them, dating to the 4th and 5th centuries, which meant the white limestone synagogue couldn't have been built before the Byzantine period. Around 400 AD, it wasn't the synagogue Jesus knew, but underneath it, they found something else. Black basalt foundations, older, dating to the 1st century. The remains of an earlier synagogue, the one Jesus actually taught in, the one Peter attended. The discovery proved that Capernaum's importance went back to Jesus' time. But the real breakthrough came 25 meters south of the synagogue, where another excavation was happening, where another structure had been found, an octagonal Byzantine church. And beneath it, something no one expected. Corbo and Lofreda had been excavating the octagonal church since 1968. It dated to the 5th century. Classic Byzantine architecture, built to commemorate something, to mark a sacred site. But what? The team carefully removed sections of the church floor, dug trenches, exposed foundations, And beneath the Byzantine structure, they found an earlier building, 4th century, also a church, a domus ecclesia, a house church, a private home that had been converted into a place of Christian worship. And beneath that, they found the original structure, a 1st century house. Black basalt walls. Rough construction. Small rooms arranged around 2 courtyards. The kind of house a fisherman would live in. Nothing fancy, nothing unusual. Except for one room. The largest room in the complex. Room 1. And that room was different. By the late 1st century, maybe 50 AD, someone had done something strange to room 1. They plastered the floor. Not dirt, not rough stone, smooth plaster. And that was unusual. Because nowhere else in Capernaum, in any other house from that period, did anyone plaster their floors. It was expensive, unnecessary for a residence. But someone did it in this room. And at the same time, the pottery in the room changed. Before, it was normal household stuff. Cooking pots, bowls, plates, the kind of things families use. But after the plaster was laid, all that disappeared, replaced by storage jars. Oil lamps, lots of oil lamps. No more cooking, no more eating. The room wasn't being used as living space anymore. It was being used for gatherings, for meetings, for something communal. And then, in the 4th century, someone built walls around the entire house, separated it from the surrounding neighborhood, created a sacred enclosure, and covered the walls with plaster, smooth, white, ready to be written on. And people wrote hundreds of inscriptions, carved into the wet plaster, scratched into the dried surface, prayers, names, symbols, all in different languages: Greek, Aramaic, Syriac, Hebrew, and one name appeared more than any other: Peter. The graffiti is extraordinary, not because it's artistic, it's not. Most of it is crude, scratched quickly, rough, but because of what it says. Lord Jesus Christ, help your servant. Christ have mercy. Peter Petros Aini, Peter is here, crosses, dozens of crosses. Boat symbols. Fish. References to the apostles. These weren't random scribbles, they were prayers left by pilgrims, by believers who came to this place because they believed something sacred had happened here. And the inscriptions date from the 2nd to the 4th centuries, meaning Christians were venerating this specific room for hundreds of years before Constantine built his empire. This wasn't a tradition invented by the Byzantine Church. It was old, passed down, remembered. And the question is why? Why this room? Why this house? Why did Christians treat this place as sacred for 300 years before anyone built a church over it? The answer is in the walls. Margherita Guarducci, an Italian epigrapher, spent years studying the Capernaum graffiti. And she found patterns, repeated phrases, symbolic language, and one inscription in particular changed everything. Petrosini, in Greek, 2 words. Peter is here. Not Peter was here. Not Peter lived here. Peter is here. Present tense. As if the person writing believed Peter's presence still lingered in this room. Guarducci argued that this phrase, combined with the crosses, the prayers, the Christian symbols, proved that early Christians identified this house as belonging to Peter, that they preserved it, protected it, turned it into a meeting place, and eventually a church. But not everyone agreed. Some scholars argued the evidence was circumstantial, that Petrosini could mean anything, that the graffiti proved Christian activity but not ownership, that the house could have belonged to anyone, and for decades the debate raged. Until more evidence emerged, evidence that couldn't be ignored. In the 1980s, researchers did a comprehensive analysis of the house. They studied the construction, the timeline, the changes, and they discovered something fascinating. The house had been continuously modified, layer after layer, for 400 years. 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century. Each generation adding something, changing something, but never destroying the original structure, never tearing it down and building something new. They preserved it, protected it, built around it, over it, enclosing it in newer, stronger structures. Why? Because they believed it mattered. Because tradition said this was Peter's house, and you don't destroy the house of an apostle. You protect it, you venerate it. You make sure future generations know what happened here. And in the 5th century, the Byzantines took it one step further. They built an octagonal church directly over the ancient house. Not next to it, not near it, over it. Preserving the exact location, making sure no one could ever forget. This is the place. This is where Peter lived. This is where Jesus stayed. This is where it all began. The octagonal design wasn't random. In Byzantine architecture, octagons symbolized resurrection, renewal, eternity. They were used for martyria, memorial churches, built over sites associated with saints or significant events. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem had an octagonal structure over the cave where Jesus was born. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem had octagons marking the crucifixion and resurrection. And now Capernaum had an octagon over Peter's house. The Byzantines were making a statement. This place is as important as Bethlehem, as Jerusalem. This is where Christianity began in Galilee. And we're preserving it. Forever. The church stood for centuries. Until the 7th century, when the Muslim conquest reached Galilee. The church was abandoned. The village declined. And eventually, Capernaum was forgotten. Buried under sand and debris, lost. For over 1,000 years, no one knew where it was. Until 1838, when an American explorer named Edward Robinson identified the ruins at a site called Tel Hum as the ancient city of Capernaum. And in 1905, excavations began slowly, methodically, uncovering the past, piece by piece. And in 1968, when Corbeau and Lafreda broke through the floor of that octagonal church, they found what had been protected all along. The house, still there, still preserved, waiting to tell its story. The house of Peter in Capernaum isn't the only archaeological site connected to the apostle. In Rome, beneath St. Peter's Basilica, there's another discovery, another tomb, another set of bones, and another inscription that says Petros Ini. Peter is here. The story is remarkably similar. In 1939, Pope Pius XII ordered excavations beneath the Vatican. Workers were digging a grave for the previous pope when they broke through the floor and discovered a Roman necropolis, a city of the dead, sealed for 1,600 years. And in the middle of it, directly beneath the papal altar, they found a simple grave, a monument, and bones wrapped in purple cloth. Gold thread, royal burial. And on the wall, scratched into ancient plaster, the same phrase. Petros Ani, Peter is here, 2 sites. 2 discoveries, 2 inscriptions, same apostle, same tradition, same evidence, and both proving the same thing. That early Christians remembered where Peter lived, where he died, where he was buried, and they preserved those places, protected them, marked them. Made sure future generations would know. This is not myth. This is not legend. This is history, written in stone, carved in plaster. Documented by archaeology, Peter was real, and the places connected to him were real. And 2,000 years later, we can still stand in the room where he lived. Still see the walls he saw. Still walk the streets he walked. That's extraordinary, that's proof. That's why Capernaum matters. But let's go back to Capernaum, to the house. To the specific details that make this discovery so compelling. Because it's not just one piece of evidence, it's layers. Multiple lines of proof. All pointing to the same conclusion. Start with the location. The house is 25 meters south of the synagogue, close enough to walk in seconds. And the Gospels say Peter lived near the synagogue. He attended regularly. Jesus taught there. So the location fits. Next, the construction. The house dates to the 1st century BC, which means it was standing during Jesus' lifetime. Peter could have lived there. The timeline works. Then there's the size. 2 courtyards, multiple rooms, big enough for 2 families. And the Gospels say Peter and Andrew shared a house. The archaeology matches the text. But here's where it gets interesting. The modifications. Because after Jesus died, someone started treating this house differently. Not as a residence, but as something sacred. And that change is documented in the archaeology. By 50 AD, maybe earlier, room 1 was plastered. The pottery changed. The function shifted, and scholars have asked why. Why would a normal fishing family suddenly plaster a room and fill it with oil lamps? They wouldn't, unless something significant had happened there, unless that room had become important, unless people were gathering there for meetings, for worship, for remembering. And that's exactly what the evidence suggests. Early Christians in Capernaum, within 20 years of Jesus' death, were using this room for communal gatherings, which means they already knew it mattered. They already had a tradition connecting it to Jesus and Peter, and they were preserving it, protecting it, making sure it didn't get lost, and that preservation continued for centuries. In the 2nd century, the graffiti starts. People writing prayers, scratching crosses, leaving their names, documenting their visits. These were pilgrims, believers who traveled to Capernaum specifically to see this house, to pray in this room, to connect with the origins of their faith, and the inscriptions prove it. They're not just random marks. They're intentional, devotional, sacred. By the 4th century, after Constantine legalized Christianity, the transformation accelerated. Walls were built around the house, creating a sacred enclosure, separating it from the surrounding neighborhood. And the entire structure was plastered, inside and out, white, clean, holy. This was no longer a house church. This was a full memorial, a shrine, open to pilgrims, maintained by the local Christian community. And the graffiti exploded, hundreds of inscriptions, some in Greek, the language of the educated, some in Aramaic, the local language, some in Syriac, the language of Eastern Christians, showing that people from across the Roman world were coming to Capernaum to see this place, to pray, to remember. And then, in the 5th century, the Byzantines built the octagonal church. Massive, elaborate, expensive. Right over the ancient house, not destroying it, not erasing it, protecting it. The church floor was elevated, supported by arches, creating a space beneath where the original house remained visible. Pilgrims could walk into the church, look down through openings in the floor, and see the ancient walls. The room where Peter lived, the place where Jesus stayed. The Byzantines weren't guessing. They weren't inventing a tradition. They were preserving one. A tradition that was already 400 years old when they built that church. A tradition that went back to the apostles themselves. And here's the remarkable part. The tradition never broke. From the 1st century to the 5th century to today, people have known about this house. Even after the church was abandoned in the 7th century, even after Capernaum became a ruin, local Christians and later Muslims remembered. They told stories, passed down knowledge, pointed to the octagonal ruins and said, "That's where Peter lived. That's where Jesus taught." And when archaeologists finally excavated the site in the 20th century, they found that the stories were true. The tradition was accurate. The house really existed. And it really was associated with Peter, because the evidence doesn't lie. The plastered floor, the changed pottery, the graffiti, the enclosure walls, the octagonal church. Every layer confirms the tradition. Every piece of evidence points to the same conclusion. This house mattered. This house was venerated. This house was Peter's, and the reason we know it was Peter's is because early Christians said so. They wrote it on the walls. They built churches over it. They preserved it for 2,000 years, waiting for us to find it, waiting for us to see, waiting for us to understand that the Gospels weren't just stories. They were history, real people, real places, real events. And archaeology proves it. Today, the house of Peter is accessible. You can visit. You can see the ancient walls, walk through the ruins, stand in the room where Peter lived, where Jesus taught, where history was made. But the site looks different now than it did in the 5th century, or the 1st century. Because in 1990, the Franciscans, who owned the property, built a modern church directly over the ruins. And it's controversial. The church is octagonal, echoing the Byzantine structure, but it's elevated, supported by columns, hovering above the ancient house like a spaceship. Modern, stark, concrete and glass, and the floor is transparent. Clear panels that let you look down and see the ruins beneath. You can trace the outline of the rooms. See the walls, identify where room 1 was, where the courtyards were, where the sacred space existed. It's an engineering marvel. It protects the ruins from weather, from vandalism, from the thousands of tourists who visit every year, but it's also jarring because it doesn't look like a church. It looks like a museum. A space more focused on preservation than worship, and that's intentional. Because the real church isn't the modern structure. It's the ancient house beneath. That's what people come to see. And the modern church is just a shell, a protective covering, a way to keep the past visible while preventing it from eroding further. The House of Peter is more than an archaeological site. It's a testament to the power of memory, to the importance of preserving the past, to the faithfulness of early Christians who recognized that certain places mattered, who protected those places, who passed down traditions, who ensured that 2,000 years later we could stand in the same room and know, this is where it happened. This is the real place. This is history. And that knowledge changes everything, because it means the Gospels aren't just religious texts, they're historical documents, recording real events, real people, real places. And when we excavate those places, when we study the evidence, when we analyze the archaeology, we find that the Gospel accounts are accurate, reliable, true, not metaphorically true, not spiritually true, historically true. And that matters. Because truth matters, facts matter, evidence matters. And Capernaum provides all three. So what's the takeaway? What's the significance of proving that Peter's house really existed? It's this. The origins of Christianity are not mythological. They're historical. Jesus was a real person who lived in a real place at a real time. He stayed in a real house with real people. He taught. He healed. He changed lives. And the people who followed him remembered. They preserved what they could, protected what mattered. And because they did, because they valued memory, because they honored the past, we have proof. We have evidence, we have archaeology. And that proof shows that the gospel writers weren't inventing stories. They were recording history, documenting events, describing places they knew, places that still exist, places we can visit, places we can verify. And every time we do, every time we excavate another site, every time we uncover another artifact, the evidence supports the text, confirms the accounts, proves the reliability of the Gospels. Because the more we dig, the more we find, the more the evidence confirms what early Christians always knew. This really happened. This really were real people. And the house of Peter in Capernaum is proof. Standing there, waiting, preserved by centuries of faithful memory, ready to show the world that Christianity didn't start with myths and legends. It started with real events, real places, real people, and a real teacher who changed everything. If this story amazed you, leave a like on this video. Subscribe because next week we're exploring another archaeological discovery that proves biblical accounts are historically accurate. A find so significant that it changed how scholars view the New Testament. And drop in the comments, have you ever visited Capernaum? Have you stood in Peter's house? What would it mean to you to walk in the same room where Jesus taught? Because that's what archaeology offers. Not just knowledge, but connection, a physical link to the past, to the people who shaped our faith, to the events that changed the world. The house of Peter stands as a monument, not to religion, but to memory, to the power of preserving what matters, to the faithfulness of generations who protected the past so we could understand the present. And when you stand in that room, when you see those ancient walls, when you realize this is the actual place, the real location, the verified site, something shifts. History becomes personal, faith becomes tangible, and the past reaches across 2,000 years to connect with the present. That's the power of archaeology. That's the significance of Peter's house, and that's why it matters. Not just to Christians, but to anyone who values history, truth, evidence, and the remarkable story of how a simple fishing village became the birthplace of a movement that changed the world forever.